He continued to assemble his skeleton with trembling hands. Simon thought he couldn't jump in over his head, since Hector was more prepared and he had only assembled the skeleton once before, the chances of winning it were slim. His only way to win was to give up trying in vain to do what he was taught in class. He wouldn't succeed anyway. He just had to trust his own gut feeling, and he smashed what he had tried to put together before without success. Simon was just going to put the bones back together the way he imagined and felt. The students started whispering in surprise and seemed to be asking, "What is this? What is he doing? Did he start all over again wrong? Maybe he's giving up." Gradually, their whispers turned into mockery. They said that he had no talent or inner sense. Simon did not pay attention to them. His new friend Dick was very worried about him, while the other students did not understand why he was number one. Simon reflected that when the professor announced the rules, he said to get the necklace using the skeleton, not to make the skeleton perfect, so all was not lost for him. He had no time. He had to forget about complex structures and make his skeleton as simple as possible. He began to assemble the new skeleton and started by adding the front legs, which he remembered were number 20. Then he added part number 27, because it was the main part, and it went very quickly. He skipped some parts, put others in the wrong places. The professor noticed his attempts and wondered what he was doing. Then he looked closely and was very surprised. How could this be? It was the first time he had ever seen such a thing. The professor could not believe that Simon had done it and how he had managed to do it at all. It was the bone structure of a grey rat. And its eyes were burning with Simon's midnight darkness. The grey rats were the ancestors of the rat men who now lived on the island. And he was able to do this because they had similar bone structures, but the grey rats were much simpler in structure. Professor Aaron could not believe that he was able to recreate another creature simply by rearranging the bones. Of course, the skeleton was not exactly the same, but it was definitely an undead thing that could move. The professor was beginning to realize what Simon had done and was very impressed that a student with no training could do it. How could he come to this conclusion based on his gut instinct instead of knowledge? The professor was beginning to understand why he was the number one choice of Nephthys. Meanwhile, Simon's friends were supporting him fiercely, telling him not to stop and to keep going. The mood of the students in the classroom also began to change. They no longer considered him a complete loser, although they did not quite understand what was happening. Only the upstart Jamie Victoria kept saying that she had made the perfect skeleton, and he was not acting according to the rules. But the smarter students realized that the shape didn't matter. Even those who were the first to assemble their training skeletons without looking at the diagram realized that they could not have done it that way. And all the students were on Simon's side and supporting him, which was very annoying for Hector, who believed that he should be the center of attention. He was furious and did not understand why everyone was supporting his rival. With all his anger, he directed his skeleton at the mutant that Simon had made. His skeleton remained intact due to its greater mass and more complete structure, while the other one was shattered. Hector looked at Simon's confused face and mentally proclaimed himself the winner. He was sure he had won and smiled smugly. But something was very wrong. Simon was smiling instead of being sad. He made a quick movement with his hand. And parts of his skeleton flew into the air, taking the necklace with them. The paw of his skeleton pulled the necklace off his opponent with a loud thud. The confused Hector did not have time to react and his unwilling servant stood there frozen. A paw of bones clutching the necklace flew toward Simon. And then the bells suddenly rang, first once. Then again. Hector didn't understand what had happened. The victory was in his hands. How could he lose? He said it was not fair and demanded that the professor stop this nonsense. After all, he had said at the beginning of the competition that you had to get the necklace using a skeleton, and it was just a piece of bone. Hector was shocked and furious. But Simon interrupted his whining with a surprised question, "Just a bone?" Hector flinched. Simon said he didn't think so and made a confident movement with his hand. Suddenly, with a crash, the parts of his skeleton began to come together. Hector watched in horror as part by part, bone by bone, Simon's undead body came together on its own. It was the first time he had seen this. A moment later, the whole skeleton stood in front of him again. Simon asked him, "So what now, is it really just a bone?" The necklace remained in the skeleton's mouth. On the orders of its master, the skeleton spat the necklace right into his hands. And he raised the necklace right in front of Hector's face, laughing in his face. Furious, Hector could barely contain himself and gritted his teeth to keep from lashing out at Simon. But they were stopped by the professor, who said enough is enough. As usual, he tiredly began to announce the winner, and it was Simon Valencia. At first Simon hesitated for a second, but then he quickly grabbed his skeleton and picked it up. And he raised it above his head in front of the whole class. He was very happy. Simon was sincerely happy to win with his skeleton. He finally won, and not to be disgraced as he usually was before. After the first day of school was over, the professors met to discuss the students' results, and they started by saying that everyone agreed that there were many capable students enrolled this year. The special recruitment students and those who got the highest marks in the entrance exams were the best, especially Malin Villeneuve, who was even better than expected. She was able to do Shanif poison on the first try. It was impressive. The other teachers completely agreed with this opinion, and one of them added that the blood of the Villian family is thicker than water. All 7 children from this family have incredible abilities. Then they mentioned the heiress of the Ivory Tower, Saren, who also showed excellent results, and it was clear why her parents were so proud of her. Châtel Mayer was not forgotten either, as he completely broke the stereotypical notions of half-giants, as there was a prejudice that they had no magical skills at all, but this was not true at all, and Châtel was very capable in the field of specialization of magic. Professor Bahil mockingly asked them if they had already chosen their favorites and reminded them that it was forbidden to force students to specialize during the protected period for newcomers. But they did not respond to his words, instead asking how his class went today. Bahil asked with an innocent smile what they meant. But they told him not to pretend, and that he knew they wanted to hear about special admission number 1, whom Naftis had personally selected. He shrugged and calmly replied that the student had lost 10-1 to another student in the class, and he was not at all convinced that he had much talent. The other professors reacted with some restraint, saying that this was not expected, but he was still special admission number 1, so was he sure that there was nothing special about him? Professor Bahil pretended to think about it and then added that he had good stamina, having endured 9 curses of exhaustion before he collapsed in his first class. The other professors were not at all pleased. 9 times is certainly a lot and stamina is good, but not at all impressive for special admission number 1. While everyone was discussing the students, Professor Aaron, as usual, was bored on the sidelines. Unfortunately for him, Bahil noticed him and told him that he was also teaching a class today, wasn't he? Aaron was in no hurry to answer and calmly poured himself some tea. Then he turned to them and said that yes, he was teaching the class. But this answer did not satisfy Bahil at all, and he asked him directly what he thought about special admission number 1. Aaron realized that he couldn't avoid answering, so he said that in his opinion special admission number 1 is a slow mediocre guy, but he has a little originality to make some creative though defective designs. Bahil's hand with the cup trembled from this answer, although no one noticed. Everyone started whispering and discussing that the number 1 special admission was not so special this year and wondered how that could be, since it was chosen by Neftis herself. Bahil couldn't believe what had just happened. It seemed that only he had noticed it, so Aaron had put up a smokescreen in front of everyone and not said everything, which could only mean one thing. Aaron was known to be a complicated person, and such a statement from him meant only one thing: he liked special admission number 1 very much. Bahil knew it for sure. After all, a slow and mediocre guy with originality in making creative defective designs. It was the best compliment Aaron could give. Bahil continued to think, the guy chosen by Neftis and set on by the fastidious Aaron was becoming more and more interesting to Bahil, and he had a desire to play with Aaron for a while. He approached him and the latter turned to him with a questioning look. Bahil asked about the statement he had made last year. Did he still stand by it? Aaron did not understand what he was talking about and asked again, last year? Yes, that statement that Aaron was no longer going to directly mentor students. Bahil said it with a seemingly friendly and innocent smile, but Aaron understood what was behind the question and lost all his confidence. He started to stammer out an excuse that he didn't mean it, when suddenly. Bam! Nephthys herself joyfully burst into the room, greeting everyone there. Immediately, all conversation stopped and everyone bowed their heads in respect to her, and she continued to greet them carefree as if they were not her subordinates, just friends. Bahil took out an ice cream from his magic pocket and was about to give it to Nephthys with a smile. She kind of exclaimed in surprise that she was surprised and had already told him to stop spoiling her like a child, but nevertheless reached out for the ice cream. Bahil told her that the virtue of being a gentleman included preparing snacks for a lady. Nephthys was pleased, waiting for the opportunity to taste her gift, and said what a smooth talker he was, and she just had to take this ice cream since she was given it. The other professors were shocked that he was carrying around a subspace freezer. Another professor pulled out a chair for her and invited her to sit down. She gladly sat down and asked how the students had performed on the first day. And the professors began to praise the different students they had talked about before, and Nephthys began to eat her ice cream with pleasure and agreed with everything. She was very pleased with so many talented students in this year's first year and hoped that the protection period for new students would soon be over. Aaron looked at Nephthys and hesitated. Nephthys smugly said that it was all great and they could report any problems to her, and if there were none, then because it was the first day of school, they could go home early and rest. Everyone was all for it. But Aaron was not going to leave and asked Nephthys if they could discuss something in private. All the professors were very surprised and looked at him questioningly, but Nephthys was not at all confused by this question and she gladly agreed. Bahil watched them leave the room. As they left, Nephthys asked what Aaron wanted to discuss, but he said he would tell her only when they were alone. Bahil noted to himself that Aaron was as straightforward as ever. But he didn't worry about it, because Nephthys would never just say what they wanted to know. Let's get back to our students. Simon and Dick were looking for a place in the dormitory, and in all the rooms they had visited there was only one free place left, and they wanted to share a room. Simon knew what the reason was. They had come to the dorm too late. All the students who were looking for a room were from their group, because summonology lasted 3 hours, so students from other groups had already taken almost all the rooms. They approached the girl in charge of student accommodation and asked if there were any rooms with 2 more free places. But she told them that unfortunately there were no such rooms on the first and second floors. Also, after looking at the scheme, they found out together that even on the 3rd and 4th floors there were no 2 free places, as well as on all other floors. They asked if they could go to the rooms and try to negotiate with the students to change places. And when they were told yes, Simon told Dick that he wanted to go look around the floors and try to find something, in case something worked out. The girl said she would go with them and help them, and she didn't notice that a group of students was approaching them from the side. Suddenly, they told the girl to move away and then immediately hit her with a tray with their suitcases. The girl fell down and the suitcases fell apart. One of those students claimed that it was all her fault, he had told her to move. The poor girl started apologizing. They told her that a caretaker like her only gets in the way, and all this happened because of her. How would she compensate them for the damage? The girl only managed to apologize under a stream of accusations and insults. When she apologized, they told her to excuse her ass for standing there, to quickly pack up her things and get out of their way. The poor girl agreed and said she would do it. But they were interrupted by Simon, who told them he was sorry, but can't they see he was talking to her? And he stood between the girl and these hooligans. Dick backed him up, saying that they were here first, so they shouldn't cut in line, and that they saw them deliberately hit the girl. It seems that these guys were nobles, so they asked them arrogantly if they were out of their minds. They were commoners, what do they think they are? However, one of them noticed something and started to push his friends. He pointed at Simon and said that he had seen him before and that he was special admission number 1 and that he had taken the oath in front of all the students. Simon's appearance scared them. They quickly and nervously packed their bags and quickly got away, threatening the girl to be careful next time. Dick laughed at those losers, and the girl thanked Simon for his help and he assured her that she didn't need to thank him, he just did what he had to do. The girl was very grateful to them and invited them to follow her. She checked her notes again more carefully and happily reported that there was actually one room left with 2 free beds. It was on the 4th floor, room 409, it had a great view and was close to the main staircase. She started checking which students had already moved in while our friends waited behind her. But something was wrong. The girl turned to them and uncertainly said that rooms 412 and 413 also had vacancies and were located next to each other and invited them to look at them. The friends did not understand what was wrong with room 409 and asked her. The girl began to clumsily excuse herself by saying that students were already living there. And one of them. But Simon didn't seem to care and just wanted to join those who were already living there. Then she told him a story about a student who lived there. His name was Kizen, and he had already studied here last year. Simon then had a logical question about what he was doing in the freshman dormitory. The girl explained that he was unable to transfer to the second year. She had heard that he had some problems and had to start over. She whispered to them that she was just a dormitory supervisor and didn't know all the details, but she had heard that many of those who shared a room with him had asked for permission to change rooms. Those students had bruises on their faces and he got into trouble because of it. Usually Kizen quickly expels problem students, so it was strange that they made an exception for Kizen. Dick started to ask Simon to choose another room. But he wanted to at least say hello to the residents of room 409, and Dick was shocked by this idea. He asked if he was really going to go in there. Simon took hold of the doorknob and creaked the door open. They walked into a room that was in semi-darkness. Simon said hello and apologized for the intrusion and for waking the residents. The silhouette lying on the bed stirred. A bandaged hand gripped the edge of the bed as Simon asked if they could move into the room. Dick was terrified at the prospect of living with such a neighbor, but Simon seemed to have no qualms. A man got up from the bed, looking at the uninvited guests with a murderous look.